views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, welcome to Higher TV. I'm your host, Aman. According to data from the National Center for Education Statistics and the College Board, today's average college tuition is 31 times more than it was in 1969, with almost 70% of students in America owing an average of $29,900. How did we get here? And more importantly, how can we go back? Joining us to discuss this is Financial Advisor Jonathan Ortiz. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Aman. It's a pleasure to be here today.
All right, let's jump right in. So tell us about your work and how in various positions you've advocated for student loan forgiveness.
My entire life I've dedicated to improve the financial health of those around me. From being the first director of the Financial Empowerment Center in New York City to running for Congress and having a platform that had student loan debt as one of the top pillars of my agenda. Student loan debt is something that is not only affecting my family and my friends, it's affecting the entire country. And it is my hope that we continue to have these conversations about the epidemic that's happening within a pandemic in our country. I'm a fearless advocate, for eliminating student loan debt, but not only eliminating, but preventing this catastrophe from ever happening again to the future of our country.
So I'm a college student, and I've seen people around me who have had to drop out of college because they couldn't afford the tuition anymore. So I wanted to ask, why has the cost of college increased so much, even though we haven't changed the level of education we're getting?
That's a great question. Very good question. A lot more people are going to school. A lot more, now universities are faced with having to hire more people. Provide more benefits, right? Not only that, a lot of these universities have they have really old pension systems, and a lot of the money is going towards paying to people who are retired, and that's something that not a lot of people talk about. And that's actually a very big issue that our generation is dealing with, because we graduate from college, we got the degree, but most jobs nowadays, they don't offer pensions, and they don't offer, but they do offer 401ks. So you do have a salary, you do come out with a $50,000, let's say you come out with a $50,000 job, but now in order for you to retire, you need to take out from your money, right? In order for you to put something away, in order for you to retire later on. So how did we get here? A lot more people going to school. That's definitely one reason. Another reason, it's the fact that the federal government has just allowed, people to just borrow. They're just allowing people to just borrow and borrow and borrow and borrow. And there's no safety. There's no safety. It's not like, oh, well, you didn't get your degree, we're going to put a pause. We're going to stop you from borrowing. No, they don't do that. You could continue to borrow from Sally Mae, and, and they don't stop from lending. And a lot of people just go by it. And people who don't have self-control, people who probably don't have financial literacy or who have not received financial counseling, they just continue to borrow. Education in particular remains the same because a lot of things haven't changed. A lot of things have not changed within the educational system themselves. We have a lot of antiquated systems, right? Where innovation, it's not necessarily valued. I think nowadays, our generation, especially because of the pandemic, people, the educational system is going to have to adapt. And they're going to have to start using innovation and start meeting people where they are. I mean, do we all have to be in the classroom? Not really. And this pandemic has taught us that. It also has taught us that even the public schools, like, kindergarten through 8th grade, you don't always need to have a teacher in the classroom. You could use technology and, lower a lot of the different, things that we're spending money on. So there's a lot of things that need to be, that need to change. But it's going to take a lot of different people to be in those rooms and in those conversations in order for those changes to happen.
So I wanted to ask, how does this, like most things, disproportionately affect people of color?
Of course, Latinos, African Americans, we are in this together. A lot of the teachers I've had, they were also African American and Latino, and they wanted us to do well. They wanted us to excel. But I think the system itself failed them. A lot of them had student loan debt. I remember a lot of my teachers had plenty of debt, and I think that they felt that their salaries were going to go up with time. It's going to take time. But I think that our generation, we're disproportionately affected by this because our families don't always leave inheritances. They leave debts. We don't have good financial health. We don't have the financial, education. We don't have the tools. Our parents are still renting. They don't own homes. They don't have the equity, and those are the types of things that sometimes people that are not of color have. They've been here for a while. They could go to Columbia and spend $60,000 a year in tuition, and it won't necessarily affect them. But someone like myself, $60,000 for a degree per year, that's $240,000 for a degree that might not pay you what you think is going to pay you when you graduate. And not only that, I think, from a young age, especially in inner city schools, we need to make sure that we're providing our students with opportunities, employment opportunities, even in high school, so that they come out with a resume, they come out with internship experiences. These things are going to give this, they're going to give you an edge. Not only are you going to come out of high school with, with financial literacy, but you come out with a resume. Maybe you intern at a really good law firm or at a, local, TV network. Right. It makes you more marketable, but it's also going to help you, land a better job after you get your degree. A lot of, Latinos, African Americans, we don't always have that network. We don't always have those connections. And we need to make sure that from the very beginning, right, from the grassroots level, we're able to fix this.
And how exactly did we go from helping some people pay for college to being $1.7 trillion in debt?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. When you go to school, and it's really sad that we live in a society where they will give you that money to go to school, right? And they won't give you that money for you to buy a home and build equity, right? They will lend you that money so that you can go to school, get an education on this promise that with a degree you might make more money than someone else that doesn't have a degree. The federal government does not have any breaks as to who they lend the money to, especially federal student loans, right? And I think that needs to change. Even though college tuition has more than doubled since the 1980s, and a lot more of us are going to school, I don't see why a college should be as expensive as they are right now. And I also don't understand why don't we put more handles, more levels, so that people don't just continue to borrow. Very quick story. I remember many years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a client. It was a couple of sisters, and they both had over $200,000 in student loan debt, and neither one of them had finished their graduate degrees. I was in shock. How do they continue? And they basically told me that the reason they continued to borrow, it was because that was the way they would pay off their rent every year. They were not getting jobs that were paying them the wages they believe they should be making, right? When you live in the South Bronx in a one-bedroom apartment, it's going for $1,500, $1,600, and you find this, loan, that, you just get, all this extra money that you're getting. So these, sometimes people will do that. And we need to put more, we got to focus ourselves in making sure that this doesn't continue to happen. Not only regulating the amount of money people are paying for school, but also how much money you could actually borrow in order for you to go to school.
And we know that student loans can be forgiven through Congress or through Biden. Could you walk us through these processes and explain why it hasn't happened yet?
Well, first, we're in a pandemic, right? A lot of us, the hope is that from this pandemic, we will also eliminate the epidemic of student loan debt, right? So right now, Senator Schumer in New York and some members of Congress here in New York are leading the way in trying to see if at least $50,000 are eliminated per student. According to the latest research, what I read recently, the president has basically a commission, and they're doing research as to whether or not he has the power to create an executive order that would just eliminate $50K from every single one of us, right? So those talks are happening. Congress could definitely, do a lot more things, but I think the plan is not just to eliminate it, but how do we prevent this from ever happening again, right? And creating a coalition. I really believe in coalition building, and I really think that in order for us to move forward effectively, we're going to need a number of people in the room, from financial counselors to parents to teachers, to say, okay, cool, this is how we're going to do this, right? So the students are going to get financial literacy, from kindergarten. We are going to help the parents, save by helping them, with programs such as New York City Kids Rise, where, we're going to start them off, give you a boost, so that you can start saving for their college, right? But we're also going to talk to colleges and say, hey, this is ridiculous. We need to figure out a price point for what's happening here. Again, in a system of capitalism that we are in, it's very difficult to sometimes have these conversations. But that's why, that's the reason why elected officials are paid, to have these difficult conversations and provide solutions.
That's very true. Thank you for explaining it to us. And what can the individual student do to help put pressure on the government to do something about widespread student loan forgiveness?
We need to organize more. We need to organize more and more and more around the conversation. We also need to be wise, right? CUNY, in particular, the city of New York has one of the top educational systems in the country, one of the most affordable ones as well. And we need to stop following other people. Just because someone went there doesn't mean that it's the best place for you, right? A lot of us do engage in programs such as SEEK, HEOP, EOP, and those programs are good. But let's not get it twisted. Even with those programs, you can still have student loan debt. So you have to be very, very difficult. Very, very specific as to what you're trying to do, what you're trying to get after you get your degree, and making sure that you are getting an education, right, in a field where you're gonna find employment in. Don't go ahead and say, oh yeah, I always wanted to be a school teacher, expecting to make $150,000 coming out of college. That's just not the way it works. You're gonna have to put in your time. We live in a society where a lot of people are just expecting things to just happen, or just because it's supposed to happen. It doesn't work that way. I think that we need to build towards it, organize around it, and making sure that the people who are representing us in office have this in mind. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of people in office right now, including in the Bronx, that they don't have student loan debt, that they don't understand the implications of student loan debt, and they're not going to do much about it because they don't understand the experiences that we are going through, right? When I speak, I speak with data. Data doesn't lie. And the data tells me that, student loan debt is an epidemic, in the United States. I think New York could definitely, be, the leader in promoting these ideas, and in the hopes that the rest of the country will follow. But we are going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to try things we never tried before. And we're going to have to fight with a lot of giants that don't want these ideas to be happening.
And how can we stay in touch with you and find out more about your work?
Absolutely. So, you could follow me on Instagram, on Twitter. I'm always, building around these ideas on improving, the Bronx and improving New York City, and the hopes that these ideas will catch fire and the rest of the country will follow. So you can find me on Ortiz for New York. You can also go on my website, which is howcanahelpnyc.com.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you to our viewers for tuning into this segment. We hope it shed some light on this issue and gave you a little power along the way.
Thank you for having me, Emil. Thank you very much.
My name is Devin Bienvenido, and I am the host of the I Am No Different From You segment for IATV, and I have a guest here with me today. My first question to you is, what is your name, your title, and your role?
My name is Adrienne Spencer. I'm the Director of Accessibility Services at St. Bonaventure University, and I help students that have all sorts of different disabilities make sure that they have access to what they need at college.
Thank you. My second question is, how would you explain a learning disability? What is a learning disability?
So a learning disability is a neurological disorder, and it's basically a person's brain is wired differently. So they learn a little bit differently. They struggle with different things. Sometimes it could be reading, sometimes writing, sometimes math.
My third question to you is there a difference between students with special needs and students with learning disabilities?
Depends. Learning disabilities are one type of disability. There are other disabilities that students with special needs might have, whether it's physical disabilities or attention deficit is a type of disability. Sometimes traumatic brain injuries can be a disability.
My fourth question is, how long have you been working with students with learning disabilities?
I have been working for, within my current position for 15 years, but I was a middle school and high school special ed teacher before that. So close to 20 years now between all of my schooling and everything.
Thank you. How common are learning disabilities among people?
I would say they're relatively common. What isn't common sometimes is it being diagnosed. So a student or a person might have a learning disability, but they are just not diagnosed with that. So they're probably more common than we think.
Can anyone develop a learning disability?
Usually people are born with disabilities. They're born with learning disabilities, but something like a traumatic brain injury might result in a disability that could mimic a learning disability.
How do you help someone with a learning disability learn better?
Different strategies and compensatory skills. So sometimes students might just need a little extra time to complete a task. Sometimes they might need assistive technology. So they might use a reading program that allows the material that's on a screen or within a book to be read to them. So it really is on an individual basis and depends on the student. But there's different accommodations that we can put in place to help students.
Thank you. That does make a lot of sense. If students are struggling in school, how would one go about finding out if they have any type of learning disability?
So a lot of times students are diagnosed when they're younger. So within, once they start in the school system, but if they have struggled within school and they haven't gone through the special education system when they're in pre-K through 12, they can be tested for learning disabilities once they're an adult. And there's different achievement tests that are given to students to figure out if they do have a disability or not.
And my final question would be, do you have any advice or tips for people or families who struggle with learning disabilities or students who are just now finding out that they have some type of learning disability?
I would say to definitely use the resources that are out there. There are a ton of resources that are available to students that have disabilities or families that are associated with people who have disabilities. So definitely using the resources that are out there to make sure that students have the access that they need.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. Growing up with a learning disability isn't easy, but with awareness and the proper help, it can make life and learning a lot more easier. That's all the time we have. My name is Devin Bienvenido with Fire TV. Once again, thank you, Ms. Adrienne Spencer, for coming on and doing this segment with me to bring up awareness. I appreciate you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Devin.
Thank you.
Welcome to Higher TV. I'm Evie Roop. Climate change is affecting New Yorkers in real time, most recently with the flooding of New York City subways. We Act for Environmental Justice is leading the empowerment and organization of people of color and/or low-income residents to build healthy communities for all. Communities built on sound and fair environmental health and protection policies and practices that allow for continued engagement. Joining us is Taylor Morton, We Act's Director of Environmental Health and Education. Thank you so much for being here, Taylor.
Thank you for having me.
So jumping right in, We Act has a rich history, founded in 1988 as part of the environmental justice movement. Can you share with us why the need for an organization of this nature was so necessary at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we look at New York City and we look at the history of planning and we look at the history of environmental racism that's occurred in the city, we found that a lot of different environmental injustices were happening in Northern Manhattan. That at one point, right, most of the bus depots were above 96th Street, right? All of them were above 96th Street. And there were just so many other issues that needed to be addressed and that were impacting communities of color and lower income communities. And that's really how we got our start. That's our movement in our community that we've really cared for from day one. And seeing those injustices really spurred the movement for our work in environmental justice.
Right. And you mentioned that We Act targets their work further in Manhattan. In what ways do you think that the Bronx is benefiting from the work of We Act?
I mean, when we think about those issues at the city level and think about injustices and, geographically understanding as well, there's a lot of ways that the same communities who are living in Northern Manhattan are also affected by these issues in the Bronx, whether that be through education and programming. We have a lot of folks from the Bronx who engage in our educational programming and practices, right? But a lot of the work that we do at the city level benefits everyone who lives in the city, and we do a lot of work in solidarity with folks who are in the Bronx, and the reality is that a lot of the same issues that we deal with in Northern Manhattan are those that folks in the Bronx deal with, even if it's around air quality, if it's around sanitation and all of these other issues that can impact our quality of life. And I think that's another important thing to think about when we look at the data. Then life expectancy and quality of life has been impacted in both Northern Manhattan and the Bronx. And the work that we do really seeks to improve those areas, not just for folks in Northern Manhattan, but for communities of color and lower income communities across the city.
Right. Thank you. And the term climate justice is integral to your work. Can you explain what that means and why it's so central?
Absolutely. Climate justice really seeks to protect folks who are going to be impacted first and worst by climate changes. And that could be due to financial disruptions, social and cultural disruptions. We'll see a lot of changes when it comes to climate change and gentrification and making sure that folks aren't being displaced from their homes because, it's more safe to be in the community that they're in because it's at a higher sea level or any of those things. But yeah, climate justice really seeks to make sure that resiliency and your capacity to respond to climate change is, the same as everyone else's, and that we are receiving both the burdens of climate change and the benefits of those climate solutions at an equitable rate, and that even means protecting communities who are more vulnerable to those climate changes first and more fervently than anything else.
Thank you. And you just touched upon that in this past question, but what is the relationship between climate change, social justice, and human rights? And then how can we navigate those issues, keeping the other issues in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, human rights and social justice are really key when we think about climate justice. A lot of times I like to frame the injustices and the justice pieces together, right? That the injustice of climate change is that folks are disenfranchised, right? Historically have been disenfranchised and don't have the resources that they need to protect themselves. And that is not the fault of the communities, but the fault of the systems, right, of oppression and all of the isms that impact resource distribution and our proximity to environmental hazards. And so the human rights piece is really saying resiliency and your ability to respond to climate changes is a right, that regardless of your background, regardless of anything about your identities or where you come from, that you have the right to survive climate change at the same rate as everyone else, and that you shouldn't be sacrificed on behalf of another community.
And what are the goals of We Act in the future, and what are some projects that are in the works right now?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around extreme heat in New York City, seeing as these really hot, extreme weather events and really hot days, making sure that our communities are protected for now and in the future, and that will continue to be an area of focus for us. We've been doing a lot of work around education as well, wanting to make sure our young people are really prepared when it comes to all of these climate changes. We've been doing work around a gas ban and decarbonization. And, We Act, I think, really takes the approach of looking at environmental justice across a lot of different areas, understanding that everyone won't feel the impacts of climate justice the same. There are different ways that will be impacted, and environmental justice is the same way. There are a lot of areas of focus that we can look at. So we try to take a very divide and conquer approach to doing the work, understanding that at the local, state, and the federal levels, it's going to take a lot of strategy to really address all of these issues and not just a couple.
Right. And I think that tying in, education for like future generations is so important, because it is a generational issue that is going to have to be dealt with going forward in the future. For you personally, what is a project that We Act spearheaded that felt the most meaningful?
Yeah, I love our education work. We have a program called the Environmental Health and Justice Leadership Training, the EHJLT. I started out at We Act as an intern, and it's something that I've been working on ever since I've walked in the door to the building. But educational work for both youth and adults is really important to being an informed and engaged participant. A key tenet of environmental justice is meaningful involvement, but it's hard to be meaningful involved when you're not really sure what's going on, which is another failure of our system, that our educational system doesn't always include the things that we need to thrive at the community level. So it's great to be able to offer some of that back to the community.
Right. And so my next question is, what would be the best way for the Bronx and Bronxites to get involved in the fight against climate change and for climate justice?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we always welcome folks to become We Act members. If you go to weact.org, you can look up ways to become a member. But if you want a more engaged way to work with folks at the local level, there are a lot of really great Bronx environmental justice groups of folks who work on clean air quality and food justice, and so many people who are dedicated to the fight in that specific borough. So I highly recommend reaching out to any of those organizations to connect. And I think committing to relearning. There are so many different things about our environment that we don't know, or that we learned that have more truth to them that we know. But committing to engaging in this work through education, I think, is a really great first step to working on climate justice and environmental justice issues.
Well, thank you, Taylor, so much for joining us again at Higher TV. Taylor Morton is the Director of Environmental Health and Education at We Act for Environmental Justice. For further information, you can go to weact.org or visit We Act on one of their social media pages. Thank you for joining us here at Higher TV.